taking a look at the screen, you'd think that I would jump right off the screen to the next one, but we're not for a minute. We're going to stay on this screen because why are we wanting to protect our gardens? We kind of missed the problem statement, didn't we? People start off with wants in every aspect of our lives, including our gardens. And as soon as you have a want and you think you have a solution for your want, we jump into worries. Is it going to cost too much? Will I have the energy to do it? Will it be too hard for me to understand? Will I need more than one person? We have unending lists of worries. So part of protecting our gardens is also protecting us and our resources to resolve those problems. So I want you to be thinking about this as really, how do we get more done with less work and work with nature to be very successful in our gardening? And protecting our gardens, in some sense, is requiring us to do some initial chat about the fundamentals. Now, I'm sure many of you will have heard these fundamentals. In my weekly activities as a master gardener, I do phone duty every Friday from 1 to 4 in the extension office, where I handle unending lists of problems that people have. They had their wants and now they have their worries. And I'm dealing with those. There are lawn questions. There's, of course, the crepe myrtle bark scale issues and so many more. And if we're talking about protecting our gardens, when we're talking about those worries, there's one of 3 things we can do with worries. We can either resolve a worry because we know how to fix it. We can redirect the worry. So yes, that's somebody else's worry. It's not our worry. Or we can refuse the worry and say, I'm sorry, but there's no turning back. I'm worried that the crepe myrtle bark scale, for example, is one of those that where like shrug your shoulder. If you don't want to do systemics and other things, you may just give it up right then and there. So we're going to be talking today about exploring the partnerships that are going on in our gardens. So with that, let's get past this first slide and go to the next. And so, oh no, Steve is going to be talking about all of this stuff. This sounds like fundamentals. Is he going to be a botanist at us? For a little bit, but do bear with me. So certainly you all know the plants. Do you know the plant names? Oh yes, Thallophyta are, who knows what that is? That's the algae. And the Bryophyta is, of course, the ferns and mosses, or rather mosses and liverworts properly. And there are others that are in that list. We can give the botanical names for them. It's not necessary. You know what all these are by the common names. But plants don't exist in isolation. And if we're talking about partnerships, yes, they can have partnerships within each other, but there's also 4 or 5 other categories we have listed here that are also their partnerships. So there's this thing called the soil matrix. What is the soil matrix? This is the non-living component, as opposed to the soil biota, which is the living component. Now, as we understand these various things, getting a successful, low-effort garden requires that we understand the pressures that these put upon plants to survive and survive well, and for us to have our wants resolved. For example, if you're vegetable gardening and you want nice tomatoes, you need to understand the biology of how does a tomato ripen and when do I take it off the vine so that I don't get something that's already been eaten. Many, many things we need to learn about the biological process. But we're going to just talk for a minute about the soil matrix and the soil biota. So certainly you've heard, I'm sure, before the kinds of strata that you find in the soil. You've got clay, you've got silt, and you've got the sandy soil. You've heard all this before. They have different properties. And how they influence plants and how plants deal with that is really important. Of course, plants also require air. They require the carbon dioxide, but they also require oxygen as well for the roots versus the stomata on the leaves, and naturally water and light. Of course, these are obvious, basic, fundamental things. Why is Steve going on about this? They need the organic matter. I put that under the dead column, the non-living. Why is organic matter there? Because it is dead. This is the tissue that has dropped off trees and is now in the process of decaying. Its life is over, but it still has the carbon base that is very useful for plants. The biota part of the soil component is the living matter, bacteria, fungi, yeast and molds, as you see there. Some of these in this list, we don't need to focus on too much. The archaea and the protozoa are less interesting. Certainly, we're interested in the algae, especially if you're into water gardening and you're interested in producing rain gardens. You want to know what its lifestyle is like. And viruses we worry about when we think of things like rose rosette and other issues that we want to deal with. Again, worries that we have on our side. And nematodes, but not all nematodes are bad. So you may have worries, but there's a lot of good nematodes out there. And of course, we have other kinds of life, the arthropods you know about. You can see the list there. If you're doing, again, aqueous gardening, crustaceans may be your thing, and you'd wonder how they fit in. For our area, for most of our backyards, we're mostly going to be concerned about the others that you see listed there. And I didn't put anything under birds and mammals because they each exert different pressures in our gardening environments. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So you'll notice in the picture here, and I'm not sure, can you see my cursor? Blake can tell me.
I can't. No.
Oh, now I see.
No, there it is. Yeah.
There it is. Yeah, because of course I have two screens, of course. Yeah, so I put it on the right screen. So you can see I'm even saying that this is an algae on the right-hand side. I thought it was really a fascinating, beautiful structure. And so part of our enjoyment as gardeners is not just harvesting vegetables, but it's enjoying the aesthetic beauty of what's around us. And sometimes seeing the micro is just quite amazing. And I thought I would just point that out and let you have that zen fall over you in the moment and just see how wonderful it is. So that being said, I think this is enough fundamental. We're not really going to be talking about soil testing or other things that you could do here. I just want you to be aware that there are multiple partnerships that are going on these various items here on the left-hand side. And it's understanding them and being successful at knowing which partnerships give good results and which partnerships are antagonistic. And that's what we're after. We want to make harmony in our gardens. So if there is one 10-second secret that I say when I'm at the Wake Forest Farmers Market every Saturday, I tell people that the secret is you got to feed the microbes. If you get people to be disabused by the notion that they are able to feed the plants or somehow directly take care of the plants, you're much better off, I think. And if we start focusing on the microbes as our ruler of measuring how successful we are, if we want to focus on that, I think that's a real step forward. And feeding the microbes then requires us to know a little bit about what do the microbes want. So certainly they want oxygen. No, they don't breathe carbon dioxide. Maybe some do, but I don't know of many. I only know of those that are oxygen breathing. There are also those that are photosynthetic. The cyanobacteria, for example, are microbes that are photosynthetic and can produce out of sunlight energy, which implies that they're fairly up in the soil level so that they can get some of that light. So certainly they require moisture and they feed on the organic matter. And yes, an ideal pH would be about 6.5. And of course, having some numbers in your head about pH, 6.5 is ideal for bacteria. Finished compost tends to be between 7 and 8, frequently at the lower end of that. And so you get to feeling as to what kind of pHs your soil will have for different things. But we want to focus on what do the bacteria want. And you see in that range, they can handle between 6 and 7.5. But truly they're happiest at around 6.5. So that's, for most intents and purposes, a target. Speaking of pH, did you know that the roots of plants, when they produce an exudate around the roots, that exudic can modulate the pH in that small area around them, that's the rhizosphere around them, by as much as 2 full units. That's amazing. They can take a 5.5 pH and turn it to a 7.5 if they really need to. And of course, this depends upon the individual species of plant, but plants are able to modify their environment. They interact with it well. So when we talk about pH, I'm really talking only about microbial life at this point, not what the plant is wanting. But because plants are more adaptable in this case than microbes, like most life lives within much narrower ranges of what they can deal with. So temperature, of course, you can see the numbers there on the screen. Between, the upper 70s is typically where they like to be happy, but they can be all the way down to these cold temperatures. They don't go dead, even below freezing, many bacteria, but we're talking about what will make them the strongest and the most productive. Naturally, they want to be protected from UV light. So the bacteria near the surface are more likely to be damaged by that. And this is why sometimes placing some bark chips on your soil can be useful, because it provides some of that UV light barrier to protect them. And interestingly enough, the microbes are also protected by having a diverse plant community. Now, I got 2 little charts here, and I don't know how well you can see this at home. I hope you can, but I want you just to be aware that microbes, especially the bacteria, if we think about how they do their processing, there are non-mineral, mineral, and macronutrients that are in the soil. And without going into details, they're mostly responsible for taking these complex molecules and breaking them down. That's the mineralization component of their processing. And then there's the reverse thing called immobilization, which takes those elemental forms and produces complex molecules again. If it were only a one-direction thing, that bacteria decompose things, we would be living in soup, but we don't live in soup. They can simultaneously be involved in building things up and tearing things down. And it is only when they're torn down to get the ionic forms that plants can consume that plants actually get any nutrition. And that's part of their lifestyle. So again, when we get the bacteria happy and healthy, the fungi, which the endoscopic fungi burrows into the roots of plants and then gives them the push to be healthy. And of course, they take their payment in terms of carbohydrate sugars that are coming on down. All of the microbes are the secret to success. Let's see. Oh, I went too far forward. Oh boy, you got a view. There we go. I got to just click the button. Okay, so let's see. So now we have an understanding of the fundamentals of just the partners and how they do their basic work. We're now about to start talking about the importance, what it means to us, and what it means to the plants to be protected. So we shouldn't be so human-centered to think that we actually are the ones that are charged with protecting the garden. Mother Nature has done this for hundreds of thousands, millions of years, maybe billions of years. So Mother Nature has a way of adapting and taking care of itself. In our own urban and suburban settings, and if we're lucky, a rural setting, we can be involved as well. And we have different needs to protect our garden than nature does. When in the wild, plants are subject to herbivory, they recover from it, and they have great mechanisms of protecting themselves. They can change the internal chemistry of the leaf. They get nibbled on by animals, and they start changing their chemistry so that the leaf becomes indigestible. Yeah, plants can do that. There are even cases where they can change the chemistry of their leaf so that the leaf itself then produces toxicities that can cause real pain for the animal, vomiting and all sorts of toxic behaviors. There's even a recorded set of plants that can generate it so that the animal that eats the leaf develops the creation of odors that it exudes. This is the animal that is eating it, and that odor attracts predators of that animal. This is like science fiction, so that the animal has been targeted. Go eat me, and then the plant is happy. Oh yeah, see what you get? I threw an animal at you. That all being said, I just wanted, the reason I'm saying this first is that plants have lots of protection mechanisms. Yeah, they can't run away from danger, but they have some protection mechanisms. They use the fungal network in order to communicate this to other plants so that they can all respond together at the same time, 6 hours or so. But still, they have a lot that they can do. So our focus is not the same as the plant focused. Our focus is that we don't want to see those spots on the leaves, or I want to harvest the fruit so that it is at the peak of ripeness, maybe, or that I can bring it indoors and let it self-ripen. We have our separate wants from nature. So when we see things in our own garden, I think one of the things we should first say to ourselves is, maybe this is okay. Maybe there's no problem at all. And one of the first things we can do is refuse the worry and simply say, no, that's okay. I will live with this because it's perfectly fine. And the plants will do great. Those of us that are pollinator gardeners will look at our gardens and say, I'm going to plant some fennel and I'm going to plant some dill and maybe some parsley because I really want the swallowtails to come all over my plants, and they're going to make a mess of those plants. Or if you look at it a different way, they're going to make those plants a wonderful place where you can come and look at the pupating larvae and caterpillars that have been on them, and see the next generation of swallowtail. And many other things are the reason why we love our gardens. So remember that wants and worries thing. I think that dominates the way I look at how we protect our gardens. It's really human focused as opposed to how Mother Nature works. So yes, we see insects on animals, like you see all those aphids over here, and we see this erosion over here that we may think is just dreadful. And we see various issues on our leaves. And if they are to the point that the one plant dies, in the big scheme of things, if it's not all the plants in the local area, Mother Nature still says, that's okay. So that being said, let's talk about our goals. We want to have healthy plants, and we want to know that with those healthy environments that we generate, we will have a better biodiversity, and the plants will be stronger because of it, because of the partnerships they develop. And in general, things will be just so much healthier that we will feel when we walk into our garden that we're doing less work and having an easier time of just seeing that our garden looks great. And there are techniques that we can use for that. So that brings us to our gardening methods. Wow, did Steve take this long to get to just the slide that kind of is introducing companion planting? So I don't particularly like the term companion planting because it takes people away from the fundamental idea of partnerships. It makes people think, oh, if I plant this plant with that plant, my problem is over and I've solved my worry. Well, if you're not thinking about the microbes, which is frequently my number one thing that I'm thinking about, or if you're not thinking about the abiotic features, like is the plant under the right amount of light? Is it getting the right amount of water, and so forth? So keep in mind that it is this very wonderful, complex mix of all of those elements that we started with. So in this particular picture, you can see I'm showing three different things. I've got some vegetables going on over here on the left-hand side, and we got some marigolds growing. And so that is what traditionally people would think of as companion planting, one plant with another. This in the middle is my absolute favorite wasp. I love it. This is the blue-winged wasp. It's a parasitic wasp. And I love it so much because when I plant plants, for example, I love to plant Thai basil. It's drawn to it like a magnet. I plant African blue basil. It loves that as well. I even plant anise hyssop, that's Agastache funiculum. I love that to tears because all three of these are just absolute magnets for this particular insect. Did you know that the parasitic wasps can't sting you? You can even go up and pet them. They can't do anything about it. They've got no stinger. They've got a ovipositor to lay eggs in their prey, larvae of various insects. Chief in my backyard are the Japanese beetles. I've got 45 feet of blackberry, and I said, I am so tired getting out in the morning and taking 45 minutes. Here's my pail of soapy water. There's a Japanese beetle. There's a Japanese beetle. There's a Japanese beetle for 45 minutes every morning. I started planting those three plants that I mentioned. 90% of my work within a year disappeared. I discovered that biological control of a perfectly docile and beautiful insect was what I had to do. So what I'm also sharing about the wasps is that many people have either negative or positive associations. I love butterflies. I hate moths. I love honeybees. I hate wasps. And the list goes on and on. Likewise, we have the same feeling about lots of plants. I'll never plant a pawpaw tree in my backyard. It stinks. On the other hand, I love the smell of the orange tree. If we take ourselves away from that and know that they all have this partner relationship that we can take advantage of, we start loving them all. And so anyway, I want you to love the wasp. It's my favorite. I hope it can be yours. On the left-hand side, that's a structural control. Can you guess what the structural control is? It is the 15 inches of height that keep those darn rabbits out of this raised bed. So there are some structural things we can do. Now, rabbits are easier than deer. We all know that. But 15 inches, it will do it. We're done. I talk with so many folks that have issues, but there are other reasons to do raised beds. Suppose one of the issues you have in your garden is that you have a really high phosphorus content in your soil. I was looking at somebody's soil test. Their phosphorus number was off the charts, crazy high. It made them almost impossible to raise a number of vegetables because it was just too high. It was toxic. So their only choice was to say, as a gardener, I can use structural controls and build a raised bed, and I've solved this problem. Phosphorus moves in the soil so slowly. How slowly? You will not outlive the amount of time it takes that phosphorus to move in the soil. Hundreds of years it can take to move. Other things move more quickly, like the potassium and others, but some are really slow. And so understanding that mineral part that we talked about earlier can let you know, do I have a problem that I can do something about or not do something about? And learning a little bit about this, and you can all Google, and add site:/edu at the end of your Google search, and you can see the answers to these common questions. What can I do about blank? And put site:/edu, and you'll get some good authoritative information. So now you've got a basic idea. We have 3 different things that we can do. Let's move on to the next item, which is talking about vegetables for a moment. So there have been many time-tested techniques. I'm sure most of you know about the 3 sisters. And you can plant the corn and the beans. And who can say what the third one is? That's a quiz test. And I'm not going to give you the answers for everything. You can paste it into the chat session and see that you're listening. I'm going to look at this and see who can answer that first. Come on. Corn, beans, and I'm waiting. Squash. That's right. That is great. And so, and thank you, Aaron, for that. So this has been known for thousands of years. From the time people were planting and harvesting, they knew that various things made a difference. It is only more recently that we're also realizing that it's not the plants, but getting back to the central thesis, that we can do other things and we can focus on things like the amount of light that they're getting and the moisture and making sure that all these other partners that plants have are in unison. So just dealing with one thing, a plant that may tend to benefit, and another, I see. Yes. So Marilyn, you got the plants in the chat. I like that. So we do companion planting. Again, fine. For a minute, we'll be superficial. And we have many, many books on the topic. I have several books like this one. It is a fantastic book. And at the last page of this presentation, I am going to show you all. I have a reference on the last page. But I'm just going to show you some of the books that have got my interest. Companion planting for beginners. If you're it's based on YouTube, and just like we have our videos on YouTube, others do, and some of them are good, and some of them are, well, not so good. And while I'm talking about books, there is yet another book, because we want to think of bugs as our friends, and all bugs can be our friends at one point or other in their life cycle. And again, all of these are in the references of the last page. And certainly I constantly hear people talking about deer-proofing their yards. So back to vegetables. We want to also know the life cycle of vegetables so that we take them off the vine at the right time. We plant them at the right height. The right height is kind of a structural control, isn't it? I'm doing an experiment in my backyard this year. I put some of my tomato plants the way you typically would do. I have them with a cage. I have those that have a top bar and a suspension line and holding them up. And I have some that I'm just letting grow right on the ground and saying, no, do your thing. I want to see what you would do if I weren't there. Well, I put it in the ground, but beyond that, I decided, let me just let it be and see what it's doing. And so far, my report is that yes, if we add structural controls, we can remove certain problems. The cage that you buy in most of the big box stores is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. It's not quite high enough. The suspension line, much better. I'm seeing great yields with that. And when you do a simple suspension line, you have just two poles and a bar on top with a crossbar across it. Now you can have 4 lines that come on down to your tomato plant, and you can have them going up 4 different directions, and you can get a tremendous harvest out of your indeterminate tomatoes. So again, when we're talking about companion planting here, I'm also wanting to mention the structural controls and the other things at the same time. I want you to stop thinking about companion planting, but start thinking, I use the word companion planting here because everyone uses that darn word. I want you to think about plant partnerships. So we're going to do all of those things. And I want you to plant, of course, the plants next to it. You got this picture of basil, of course, intermixed with the other vegetables and so forth, and the dill with the eggplant. You have other kinds of partnerships. You can add to various vegetables plants that are in the carrot and cilantro family, and that tends to suppress the potato beetle. You have cole crops. Anyone know what a cole crop is? Come on. I'm going to wait just a second. I'm not going to tell you what a cole crop is. Someone will put it in there. Tell me what a cole crop is. But if you plant cole crops and plant black-eyed Susans along with them, you got 1. And you got 2. And now we're done. There are certainly more. Thank you so much. I like the interactiveness that we can do sometimes together. You plant the black-eyed Susans, and you can improve your harvests as well. It's really fun. Now, the books that I showed you before, they have unending lists of these. I tend to like that first one that I did, the plant partnerships. The author, as you'll see in the back, this is a science-based book, so it's one of the best ones that I can recommend as a Master Gardener volunteer, because it really was researched properly. Not just some of these books that you think that people are just screen scraping Google and then putting out a book based upon unverified information. So try to get verified information whenever you can. Okay, so we are going on to the next slide now. Let's go see. So we talked about veggies. Does anyone think that it's companion planting is just for veggies? No, it's for every plant. Plants help each other. And yes, you can do it for ornamentals. And so in the picture here, you can see the astilbe with the fern, and you can see such a lovely show of clematis with the roses. And of course, here you've got the echinacea with some lovely lavender. And they really help each other grow better. And so again, there are so many lists of these things out there. And I was going to make an offer. This is just a test. Let's see if Blake yells at me for this one. A test. Anyone who wants, I'm putting together a list of specific companion plants for ornamental and vegetable gardening. I'll be happy to send you a PDF of that document when I've completed it, if you will include your email address. Or alternatively, if I don't know if the email address is available directly because you signed in, I could just give the PDF to Blake and he can distribute it. How about work with Blake after this presentation and figure a way to go forward on it?
That'll be fine. I can probably post a link to the PDF in the description on the video so that anybody who can see it can get to it. So
that'd be great. So I'm really a big fan of putting together lists. Oh no, Steve is going to be opening up the Triangle Gardener. He's doing it again. This is shameless self-promotion. I couldn't care less that it's in this thing, but on page 6 of the current edition, there's me when I was still a short-haired guy until COVID, and after that, I let my hair grow out. Now I got my mom hated that flat top that I was wearing, so now she's happy. But I put together an article, and the stuff in green there are 2 lists of ornamental plants and vegetables that you can grow in the months of July and August. So I really love giving out lists because sometimes, especially being an engineer, I don't want to hear all the words. Just give me the lists. So I'm happy to give out lists of companion plants of both kinds, the vegetable as well as the ornamentals. Okay, let's go see where we're at next. Believe it or not, we're on slide 8. You'd think that only having 13 slides in my deck, I might be going through them like that. But there's really a lot to say. And if we're going to have fun with each other, who wants to be rushed, right? So we get to now talk about biological control. Look at these pictures. Now, I did find this one image that was so nauseating that I couldn't bear to put it into the video, or not the video, into the PowerPoint slide here. Some of them are a little horrifying to see what insects do to each other. But you know, it's the way it works, and we can't feel badly that Mother Nature works this way. It's part of the chain of life. So I want for myself to get rid of that revulsion of seeing these things happen. How many of us who have seen a spider take some prey and feel bad for the prey? And none of us typically feel like happy for the spider. Oh, you caught it, you good thing, you. So we should be relatively neutral on this and feel like, no, it's perfectly okay. So some people say to me, and I'm mentioning this because some people say to me, I don't want to do biological control because I don't want to hurt those other insects. And I don't really want to be rude and say, oh, get over that. But what I do want to say is that we live in kind of an artificial environment. This is not pure nature where the nature has already got a balanced system. We've created these suburban and urban environments where we are now part of the mix, like it or not. So if we know that certain insects are able to help us, we need to figure out a way of bringing them to our gardens. So we first of all recognize that some insects, so in this particular case, I'm showing aphids all over the place here, aren't I? And I'm trying to show that, yes, we can do something about aphids. But there are 2 ways to look at everything. You could say, I want to get rid of aphids, or I want to draw in lacewings and lady beetles into my yard. So there are some interesting techniques for for doing this. You may want to introduce sacrificial plants into your garden. Those are those banker crops that you would put into your garden, and simply say, yes, I'm putting this plant here because I know that it will be drawn by these plants. If you're in the farming business, you know that they put in grain crops because they will draw like mad aphids to them. And when they have the grain there and now you have, I said that wrong. Correct myself. Can't say anything wrong. They will draw like mad the lacewings and the lady beetles to them because those plants will draw the aphids, but more importantly, in volume, they will draw the predators as well. That's the right way to say it. And what we're trying to do is realize that we have to figure a way to draw the predators to our garden. So a couple of tips here. I'm a beekeeper as well, and bees practice something that many insects do, and that's called flower fidelity. The same thing it goes to leaf fidelity. Many insects will want to look at groupings of plants, meaning the same plant, more than just one or two, not separated from each other in a garden. So when you're putting together your garden, make sure you're putting groupings of the same plant together because they're much more of a magnet than they would be if you put them individually. So if you're putting in some of those marigolds along with your vegetables, don't just put one or two, put a mess of them together. That will draw far more of the beneficial insects to your garden and get rid of, will also have the repulsive act as well for those that are repulsed by marigold. You'll notice that on the chart here, I do mention nectar, and I don't mention pollen especially here, but it is the case that different insects are drawn to different food sources. It is the case that ladybugs and lacewings, they want the nectar. The larval form of the parasitic wasps, they want the insects. So this is where I come back to this slide and say, if they want the insects, you got to draw them, but maybe where you want to draw them is to that sacrificial plant. And now that they're near the sacrificial plant or plants that you've done in a group over here, you can now put other plants near it that you really care about, your vegetables. And because the predators are so close by, they will now take care of your other issue. Biological control isn't just as simple a matter as saying, I'm going to put out some anise hyssop or some Thai basil or some African blue basil. The Thai basil, by the way, is an annual perennial. It will come back. I shouldn't say annual. That doesn't make sense, does it? It's an annual that comes back every year. There you go. But the African blue basil, what we're talking about it, is a sterile hybrid. It smells wonderful. It's got a lovely camphor smell, but all three are very good magnets. And so I use them, and then I have my vegetable gardens near them. And that has significantly reduced my pest problems in my vegetable gardens. And that's really what I'm trying to get to. You got to know what draws the predators to your garden, and then just have them off to the side. And some of them you can intersperse with interplanting in your vegetable gardens. The same thing is true for ornamental crops. And again, we'll put together lists for this. Okay, so that being said, beyond just insects and biological control, there are some things that we can do ourselves if you feel the need to do things like spraying. Now, spraying, I'm not nearly able to say is my 100% solution for this, because spraying will put pressure on pollinators. I'm a beekeeper and I know that garlic sprays kill bees. There's in the way of measuring how lethal something is, that you will see the abbreviation LD50, lethal death 50%, meaning that at a certain dosage, if you apply this spray, 50% of some population of insect that you care about is going to die. Now, even if you have a lower amount, that LD50 is cumulative. And they typically, when they're talking about the LD50, they do not talk about the cumulative effect of this. They only report the first exposure. It's really unfortunate because it would really be useful for people to know the long-term exposure. So in the case of things like garlic, I know that the LD50 sounds like a small number, but over repeated exposures. For example, I remember talking to a spraying company, and they said they will come out every 3 weeks during a season. They will spray your backyard. It will help get rid of mosquitoes and ticks and other issues. And then I looked it up and I saw an LD50 number that was below 5%. And at first I thought, that's okay. But I did some more investigation, because we should never do a superficial investigation. And I discovered that over multiple exposures, you hit that LD50 number within 7 exposures. And if they're doing it every 3 weeks over the course of a summer, they're going to get 7 exposures. So I didn't like that at all. And in fact, one year when I was tending bees, I had a neighbor of mine who was spraying with garlic spray. This was what made me research it in the first place. And I lost an entire beehive. And he said, but I read that garlic is non-toxic. Well, it's not non-toxic unless you define non-toxic as to mean LD50 is above a certain number for the first exposure. But the truth is, none of us tend to think of non-toxic that way. We just want to know, is it poisonous to our pets, to our favorite insects, and to others? So just letting you know. Now, others can have a lower LD50, and others can also negatively impact the plant itself. When you're spraying on a plant and you clog the stomata of a plant and the plant can't breathe, you've now put the plant under stress. So now you're doing this balancing act. How much do I do something and how much reward do I get? And I want you to be thinking about this in regard to sprays of any kind. On the other hand, see, I keep on saying this, there's no true answer here. You can't say Steve has said, always do this or never do this. If you are growing peaches, and I have peach trees, you must spray or you don't get fruit. Or if you get fruit, it is so tiny and insignificant that it's not worthwhile. I went down to the Johnston County Master Gardeners. There is a wonderful orchard out there that they use as a demonstration and experiment area. And the folks down there gave a great presentation on why the use of various sprays was absolutely necessary if you're looking to grow your peaches, your plums, and other. But this is where then you must be very, very careful to follow the instructions exactly as written, and to do it at the right time of day so that you have at least a minimal impact on your insects around that you care about. Also, your pets, your children, any of these chemicals that fall on the ground, your children, your pets will walk into the house, and now you have this chemical in the house, and then it evaporates and you're breathing it. So be careful, but there's not a right and wrong answer. I wanted just to share this with you here, just to say that it's okay to use, but do it knowingly. Okay. And I gave you, again, a recipe that you could actually look at so that you can know how to make it yourself. Because again, Steve likes lists. So in the area of birds, reptiles, and mammals, all I really want you to know here, again, look at this. Steve just can't say yes or no on anything. He's always in between. Birds, reptiles, and mammals, are they good? Yes. Are they bad? Yes. So how are they good? Birds eat lots of insects. Garter snakes. Have you ever seen a video of a garter snake eating a slug? It is something to be seen. And moles and voles, they do aerate. So these are all good things. I only ever hear when I'm doing master gardening stuff that moles and voles are hated, but they do good stuff too. So do ants. There are, of course, these animals, many of which do pollinate and disperse seeds, all good things. And yet there are some things from our human perspective that we don't like. There we are back at the human perspective. They eat fruits, they eat the vegetables that we want, they may cause plant damage. Sometimes it's severe, especially with cases of the larger mammals like deer. And then we feel like we need to impose some structural controls. Like, for example, if you have a leaning, but not 8 foot, you can even have a leaning short fence. A leaning short fence with the deer's poor depth perception can be an effective deterrent for deer come into your garden without having to erect an 8-foot fence. And there are many other techniques that you can find online as well. That's one of my favorites, because then I can even make it a decorated leaning fence, and the deer, even with the decorations, they get put off by it. And of course, you can do structural things like planting very thorny things at your periphery and get rid of them. So we can, even for the mammals, cause them to not invade our gardens as much. But the truth is, for the larger mammals, only structural controls will work. In some places, you've got to put that 8-foot fence up, or you're going to have deer in your property, or you do something else. Yes, it is true that you can put in some plants that they like less, but when they're hungry, they will eat most anything. I thought these pictures here were quite fun. People don't tend to like grasshoppers, although they have their place. They're a great thing in the food chain, and the birds take advantage of them. I loved seeing my bluebirds eat insects. Many times they're beneficial, but sometimes they're those that we consider non-beneficial. And even when I look at this vole, I think, wow, what a cute little creature. It all depends on your frame of mind. And they do great aeration in the soil. Okay, we've covered that. So let's move on to, and I didn't mention, but they also do a great job in terms of pollination, many of these creatures. So there's lots of pluses. If you are really determined to get rid of the rodentia in your backyard or your front yard, wherever it may be, you may want to consider putting up an owl house. And I put here a little formula for building an owl house. You can see it's very simple. You can just put together a little box and staple it together. You make it 38 inches high, 18 inches wide, 12 inches deep. You make a 6-inch hole. You can make it square if you like. You can make it round. It doesn't matter. The owl will do just fine with it. And make it roughly 6 inches by 6 inches or 7 by 7. Ideally, it's a little bit elliptical. A 6 by 7 is kind of the ideal. And usually about 6 inches above base. So you can see that the owl can perch and look out. And it likes that lip so that when it's raising its young, they feel protected. So this is an ideal owl house. Bat houses are great as well. I don't see many bats in my area at all. And some people, because of the bat guano, are hard pressed to want to put it against their own house, like you see here. Instead, they opt, well, of course, these are bat houses here on the left. And so typically they're put further away from a house, but it has to be sturdily connected to a tree. They do not tolerate it being flopsy. I made up a word there, didn't I? Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is really the last functional slide of the deck, and then we'll be able to move to the Q&A on this thing. In structural control, so I have a corgi, so I had to find at least one slide that had a corgi in it. I have a red corgi myself. And so I was attracted to this picture. That's not my yard and it's not my fence. But when you do structural controls, if you build them, you take on the responsibility of maintaining them. And you build them for various purposes. We've got a fence over here that clearly we're trying to create some separation between one place and another place. And whether it's a solid fence or not depends upon the reasons for the separation. Certainly for our pets, we want to make sure it's safe so they don't get hurt. This second one has a shade on top because some plants at different times of the year simply can't tolerate the heat that they handled at other times of the year. And if you want to extend your harvesting season, you can give them some sunshade. And you can be creative with sunshade as well. You can plant taller plants that will be at the southern exposure so that they shield plants that are shorter with them and are covered by the hot afternoon sun. Lots of creative things you can do. Yes, you can build things, but you can also plant things that give them shade. You can plant trees and other things. Just be creative with how you provide sun shade for plants. Clearly, some plants may want more water than others, and so you could do irrigation things in your yard to help channel water closer to them. If you have an abundant supply of water, you might have a rain barrel. This is the structural control, again, that is adequate for the rabbits. And then, of course, I show this picture over here to show that if, in fact, you've got a heavily sloped property, you can add some structural control that allows you to have more planting area and less worry from erosion. And erosion can be a natural thing, but when we're on our properties, we tend to not think of that as a good thing. Now, this can be an expensive way to solve it, or you could dam up front and create a French drain or some capture basin that will pull the water away. That can be relatively inexpensive, and you can manage your water issues in your yard. So dealing with things like wind and sun and herbivory all can be done with various structural controls. And thinking about it from our perspective, that left part of the slide where I'm saying we protect it for various reasons, and we tend to be, again, thinking about our worries, our human uses of our land. So I want you to take just a second and see the references that I put together. Let's go see. So I put together a reasonable list of references. I didn't want to bore you. There were actually quite a bit more than that to get the final thing, but I did list some recommended reading, and certainly that second item in the list, that Jessica Wallace-Sir's book, I have found to be just fabulous. I also have recommended books not listed here on soil ecology, which I have found tremendously interesting. So for those of you that are really interested in soil ecology, I will also include in the PDF that I'm sending to Blake, some other books on soil ecology so that you can become, do you remember we go all the way back to, I'm going to zoom on back to the slide. Here we go to the one, not there, not there, not there, not there, there. The secret to successful gardening. And if you can do that, the game is over. So I want you to tell other people, frankly, most people don't have a long attention span for an hour. Oh my goodness, I've been talking for nearly an hour. I think we started a few minutes after, so I probably used my right amount of time. So we are going a little bit beyond an hour. Sorry about that, Blake. But as you can see, I love this topic. And I also like a simple answer. Do this one thing, and you're better than 95% of all the gardeners in the entire world. That's the end.
Right.
Q&A time.
Wow. No kidding. Yeah, no, that was the perfect amount of time. Well done, Steve. Very well done. And I got to say, that was the most scientific approach to the concept of open your heart that I've ever heard before. I feel like that's what I got. Open your heart more up to nature and all of its little intricacies. And that's the key to success right there. So, okay, there were not too many questions. There was one question that was important, and feel free, anybody, to drop more questions into the chat as we go through this. But Marilyn did ask a question where she asked, will you tell us why, how, what those ornamental plant partnerships you listed benefit each other? So I guess sort of like you had like the list of the different ornamental plants and their good companion lists. So I guess she's more asking like, what's the mechanism behind how they help each other, I guess, to get an idea to apply it to other plants and stuff.
Okay. You're all now turning into horticultural biochemists for this answer. We had talked a little bit about how when plants under herbivory can have a response, right? And if you kind of, by metaphor, think of the human nervous system where a signal is transmitted from our brain to our hand and our hand moves. Between plants, through the rhizosphere, through the fungal network under our feet, plants can communicate information. But not all plants are good receptors for the signals that are conveyed under the ground. And it is the case that certain pairings are better. And this gets into, frankly, the taxonomy of the plants and how the plants biochemically respond to certain signals. So the scientists who have deeply studied this, who have gotten PhDs on this, they have essentially given us the answers. And this gets down to the biochemistry of how do plants work and what are they looking for. It also takes into consideration that, as I mentioned before, plant roots can modulate the pH of the soil. And if you have different plants together that may have somewhat different requirements, and you want to have this plant in this area, but it really isn't happy naturally with the soil, and maybe it could modulate it, but not do so well. By putting a plant near it that can modulate it better, the plants work cooperatively, and of course the plants throw their roots under the ground together. And you all know that the vast majority of roots are in the top 4 inches of the soil. The next bunch will be down to 9 inches, but they're competing for light, they're competing for water and other things, and so they're going to be interspersed with each other, and therefore the exudates from the roots are going to be touching each other, and they are going to benefit each other in this way. And so it's all about biological synergies that happen between plants, either because of their genetic structures, allowing them to do different processing in certain ways, or because they are leveraging each other's waste material or exudates. That's the primary answers. There are secondary answers, but this already gives you the base idea of why this works. Now, we can't look at a leaf ourselves and say, I can tell. But what we can do, and I can put something like this into the PDF as well. Wow, this is going to get to be a big PDF. As we know that there are various plant families, and we can make some gross generalizations that are not always true, but as with most things in life, it's better to start with a gross generalization and try it. And yes, we'll see some failures because it is, after all, just a gross generalization. But now at least we have the basis for making some good decisions on our plants. I think that's the answer to the question.
Okay, yeah. So it'll be really different for every species, obviously, and you can try and make as much generalizations as you want, but of course you'll fall flat because that's just the nature of generalizations. But yes. You think that how about a good list would be the answer to this question? A nice good list of plants and their interactions.
Right. And I had done research and I said, I'm looking for these pairings. And then I went through the labor for all of these pairings. I wanted to know what plant families they were under.
Sure.
And I wanted to see, is there a pattern to this? There's a pattern. So I will expose the pattern in that PDF. Now, right. You will find far better research things than I did by this empirical just searching of a number of items. And I want you to feel free to look at that same kind of a thing by doing research, but I will give you enough to be dangerous.
Well, that's okay. You'll give us enough to give something to try out in our gardens. And then that's half the fun of gardening, is trying new things. So that doesn't sound too dangerous to me at all. Somebody has a comment. They said, thank you for the science-based approach, but they're also asking, what do you think about spraying with BT? Is it too dangerous for butterflies?
So, as I mentioned before, that many things have unintended effects. BT is a less of an issue as far as I'm concerned. There are aquatic issues with it. If you're near a riparian area, if you are doing it in the very early morning, Steve is telling you to get up before 6 a.m. now, or if you're doing it in the late evening, you're not doing this until 8 p.m. or later. In the summertime, 9 p.m. or later. In the wintertime, 8 p.m. Really late. I don't want to take any chance of hurting things. And that reduces at least significantly. But you have to ask yourself, is the flow from my garden going to go into a riparian source? If the answer is yes, I would encourage you to look for other approaches.
Definitely. Good point. Absolutely. And I like how you're thinking about like the schedule of the animals you're trying to protect so that you can avoid spraying around them. Like it's about opening your mind to all aspects of nature. And that way you're not, focusing too much on one and hurting others.
And I want to say this as well. I realize this wasn't asked, but we are entering in what might be turning out to be an analog of the Dutch elm disease. The crepe myrtle bark scale is going to be catastrophic potentially. We don't know right now, but the current graphs that show the degree of damage that is being done and people's not wanting to see that sooty mold all over their trees is going to make people abandon these. And remember, one of the three things you can do with a worry is reject it and simply not buy them. I actually went out to 3 nurseries in this local area, the Raleigh local area. One of them has already discontinued crepe myrtles and has already said that they will no longer be selling them. This is just a word to the wise that one of the answers you can do for some things is to simply, pardon the expression, cut bait on this thing. And to remove some plants that may go into the cycle, you may have to eventually be required to fire burn it, because removing it while it's infected with these will simply spread the male winged insect everywhere. So it can be very expensive once you are infected. So it's a very difficult situation. People have invested a lot of money. You have mature big trees. It's going to be very costly. Think about what the right thing is at the right time and make a personal choice.
Yeah, for sure. That's good advice. And I think there is one last question to ask, and they are asking for your thoughts on deer spray, like the brand I Must Guard. Do you know if it has a good, bad, or neutral impact on beneficials?
I don't know. I don't use deer sprays at all for all the same reasons that I don't use any sprays. And frankly, from other master gardeners who I've asked about their spraying, I can't name brands, but they have only gotten so-so behaviors. They've had to do some kind of structural controls. They've done things from putting down aluminum hanging from threads that scare the deer, but they get acclimated to things very, very quickly. And I've seen various products that, for example, shine like owl red eyes at them at nighttime, or squirting water and various things. And in almost all cases, unless you're moving these around, the deer become acclimated to them. The only 100% solution is structural controls with a fence they cannot breach. Everything else will have a lesser success rate. The book that I showed, which is in the item there, can essentially give you the same kind of information. But some people are just willing to do anything, even to make it a little bit less dominant. The problem also with deer is that they get into a rut season, and in the rut season, their brain is turned off and they're simply going by their behaviors, and they will do things like rubbing against trees and other things, and you can't stop that. So they can damage plants not just by eating them, but by just knocking them down. It's part of their inbred nature. It's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for pulling together this presentation. It was absolutely wonderful, very enlightening, very mind expanding. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. People are asking if you could show the reference page again. So if you would be so kind as to
and take a screen scrape while you got it.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you everybody for tuning in with us this morning. Oh, geez.
Where'd it go?
Vanishing pages. Oh gosh. Well, so if you're watching the recording of this, you'll be able to pause it on the reference page, and we should have that references available to you in the description of the video. So
there we go. I got it back.
There it is. Hello. Wonderful. Thank you. So thanks again, Steve. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this Master Gardener presentation this morning. We will have another Master Gardener presentation next month, I believe, on August the 28th, and we will be going over drought-tolerant plants with Lisa Greel-Berry. So that should be a lot of fun. I hope you guys will join us for that. Y'all take care.
Bye, all.